I've never been one for the survival genre. Time and again I've tried, but nothing ever seems to captivate me for any meaningful length of time. But with 238 million in Minecraft sales, the biggest selling video game of all time, and a $2.5 billion acquisition of its developer by Microsoft, it's safe to say I'm in the minority with that mindset. Not that I didn't like the idea of Minecraft, but as someone who has all the creativity of a diuretic slug hastily crawling across a white canvas, I always felt like I was missing out on what clicked with everyone else. Enter Grounded, a survival game by Obsidian, the creators of the best game ever, that's just a fact. Grounded almost feels like it slipped straight under the radar for most people shortly after its announcement way back in 2019. But with the game coming out of early access and finally having an official launch, I wanted to use my widespread influence and notoriety to bring more attention to it. Is it the next big thing in the survival genre, or is its charm the only thing keeping it from being macroscopic? Let's find out as we take a look at Grounded. Here's your spoiler warning for the rest of the video. I won't be spoiling any of the story, but you may see some enemies, weapons and armor sets from the later sections of the game. Some spiders as well, so people with arachnophobia may want to tread carefully. You have been warned. So the game starts with your character awakening next to a giant foam-lined case with no recollection of what happened to you or how you got here. Where is here exactly? Well, taking a few steps out of the cave, you quickly learn that you've been shrunken down to the size of an ant and left to fend for yourself in the backyard of one Dr. Wendell Tully. You see a machine off in the distance and, in an attempt to figure out what's going on, end up blowing open a doorway into the laboratory underneath the oak tree. From here, you meet a robot named Burgle, Dr. Tully's assistant, who explains that the good doctor was the lead scientist working on the Spacer project, the very same technology responsible for your current predicament. Burgle then goes on to say that the only way to return home is to create a mixture to restore you to normal size, but unfortunately all the information required to do so are on chips that are each in different labs around the garden. Burgle marks their locations on your map, and with that your adventure begins. As you travel around the garden, you'll explore other laboratories and gain more insight into the events that led up to this moment. The story is pretty basic for the most part, but it works well at giving you direction and purpose to the things you collect. I think it's best seen as a secondary objective, more of a waypoint should you ever need to know what to do next. I did however find myself becoming invested in Dr. Tully's plight, despite the game having pretty much no NPCs at all, so world building primarily comes from pre-recorded messages scattered around the yard. Seeing pictures of him becoming more and more disfigured from the side effects of shrinking himself definitely helped to sell it to me. Little background pieces like that are scattered all throughout Grounded and they're fun but pretty easy to miss. I had to laugh at the implication that Dr. Tully's two children kept accidentally killing their pet hamsters. Here's a photo of them about to feed it some bubblegum, here's its grave, and here's a skeleton with some chewed gum stuck inside it. Morbid, no point in letting it go to waste though. Ah, delicious. Without spoiling too much, I thought the main villain was lackluster at best, being far too passive of a threat when they outright admit they want you dead. Until the very end of the game, they have absolutely no presence throughout the yard, and when the curtain finally does lift on them, they're just an optional side mission with the standard bugs you encounter throughout the yard taking centre stage. Speaking of bugs, the yard is naturally home to a variety of insects, and if you want to survive in this hostile land, you'll need to go up close and personal with them. All of them. I'll touch on their designs in more detail later, but bugs serve as your main enemy of the game, and with over 50 different ones to come across, some of them being reskins however, they also play an important method in gathering better equipment. Being that Grounded is a survival game, there's a large emphasis on crafting items, armors and weapons from the common resources found around the garden. Simple things such as sprigs, pebblets and grass fibre can be manipulated into tools, allowing you to get better resources and craft more extravagant variants for the cycle to repeat itself. Typically, items are placed into tiers, where a tier 2 hammer can only break tier 2 or lower resources, and so on. Having to fight a ladybug for the first time with tier 1 gear is no easy task, but once you've conquered a few of them and used their loot to craft the ladybug armour, your survival in that area is much more likely, but not guaranteed. It's an excellent way of making the player feel like they're getting stronger over the course of the game without the use of a traditional levelling system. That being said, some grinding is needed to progress for better gear, and I could see that getting pretty tiresome for certain players. I always thought that came with the territory though, but I don't have much experience in the genre to compare it to. With so many items and bugs to face, that naturally means that combat plays a big part in Grounded, and mainly focuses around melee weapons with a strong emphasis on blocking and parrying the enemy attacks while finding your own openings to strike. It's a solid idea, and Obsidian clearly thought very hard about how each insect could use their physiology to play into their moveset in a somewhat cartoony fashion. Bombardier beetles will fire acid-based mortar-like rounds, roly-polies will curl up and bounce towards you like a truly dedicated Sonic cosplayer, the list goes on. Having such a large pantheon of insects to duke it out with means that there's a lot of attack timings to learn, but that too feels great. Perfect blocking every hit sure isn't easy, but when everything starts to click into place on your timing, it makes you practically untouchable. That too is another really good way of making the player feel like they're gaining strength, albeit in a more organic way. Melee weapons aren't your only choice of violence though. The game gives you access to shields for prioritising defense as well as crossbows for dealing out ranged damage. Crossbows are a damn godsend when dealing with flying enemies and even give you access to a range of ammo types such as gas and bomb arrows at the cost of not being able to block. In truth, I tend to find the crossbow a bit situational, with most enemies sponging up all the damage while you flail around trying to reload the damn thing. I get the impression they work better in co-op, having a teammate take the heat at close range while you and the boys light them up at distance. And you'll want to bring some friends if you can, because this game can get tough at times, really tough. No, it's not the same level as a Soulsborne game, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that it'd have more of a laid-back attitude towards its difficulty given its appearance. Even on normal mode, the game will test your knowledge of its mechanics, making sure you've got the right set of gear for the job, but luckily it won't penalise you for dropping to a lower difficulty at any point during your playthrough. Of course, you can't keep the fight going forever. The day grows shorter. What happens when you tire and need to sleep? Where do you go to avoid being brutally mauled by a horde of giant insects akin to Peter Jackson's King Kong movie? Well, it's a survival game, so you're gonna have to build your own sanctuary. Much like with your weapons and armour, basic resources found throughout the yard can be used for building structures to keep you safe. Huge weed stems can be turned into sturdy walls and flooring, pebbles and clay can smooth out the ground to make a nice even surface for building. You get the idea. Structures come as prefabricated pieces that slot together as if part of a grid, and makes building more complex structures a breeze. It's way more simplistic than something like Minecraft, and I doubt anyone will be using Grounded to build a working computer with the tools on offer here, but it worked great with what the game wants from you: to survive. You don't even have to spend resources building something only to find out you don't like how it turned out, as all building pieces start out as a blueprint, allowing to essentially build the whole project before committing to it. I love the hell out of this feature, and it saves so much time avoiding the trial and error mentality that comes with building these sorts of projects. Well, I love this feature when it works. The problem with this system is that it really can't decide when it should and shouldn't let you connect certain pieces together. Symmetrical structures that will build fine on one side will suddenly not work on the other, and heaven forbid that one of your pieces is destroyed and needs to be rebuilt, because it's a roll of the dice on how much of your base you're going to have to purposely destroy just to rectify the problem. This isn't the worst issue to Plague a game, but it was all present throughout the early access, so it's a shame to see it persist into its full release version. Speaking of base building, every now and again you'll piss off the residents of the yard with your xenophobic and downright genocidal outlook towards them. The bugs in turn will mount a counterattack on your base, where you'll kill some more of them. Kinda wish they'd fleshed this out more, to be honest. It's just fighting bugs you normally would out in the wilds, but now you can do it from the comfort of your own bed. However, with your base now fully built, it's high time you kit it out with a range of functional furniture. There's the survival game basics for collecting water and cooking food, but later down the line you'll get access to the likes of a spool for making zip lines and even a damn mini fridge. Never again will you have to worry about your well-stocked food reserves spoiling. It's clear that a lot of attention was put into making these all have their own utility, and seeing how all the resources used to craft them fit together makes their designs really stand out. There's also an in-game shop that lets you buy various recipes, perks, and advanced building designs which you can purchase using Raw Science, Grounded's version of an in-game currency. You can gather a bunch of Raw Science from doing challenges and progressing through the story, but you'll also find it in some hard-to-reach places in the yard to further encourage exploration. The way they handle Raw Science works great, as it lets you pick what you want to prioritise without the fear that you're not gathering it efficiently enough. I definitely recommend you get the Raw Science and Milk Molar tracking upgrades as soon as possible though. They make progression through the start of the game so much smoother. Ah yeah, I haven't even talked about the graphics of the game yet. Grounded is one visually stunning game on Series X and is happily taking full advantage of the hardware with a smooth 4K 60fps benchmark, unlike other AAA developed games that have released around the same time. The vibrant greens and yellows pop out beautifully and go a long way to making each biome feel distinct from one another. I'll admit I was skeptical at how much mileage they could get out of a backyard environment in suburban 90s America, but they absolutely nailed it. You'll travel through overgrown grasslands, scorching desert wastes of the sandbox, right down to the claustrophobic depths of the pond to name a few, and they each add their own spin to the gameplay. Kinda wish there were weather effects to go along with that though. Rain or snow could completely alter how the garden works, but I get it, that would be a complete nightmare to implement. Missed opportunity not having an ice biome at least, like a giant toppled over freezer or something. Ah well, here's hoping there's going to be a Grounded 2 at some point. I do like that they add a nice dose of sci-fi into the mix as well by letting you explore those laboratories I previously mentioned. They're good at breaking up the survival aspects, relying more on puzzle solving and story progression. Think of them like a dungeon from Skyrim, only very short. They're fun for what they are, but once you've completed them, there isn't much point in revisiting. My favourite biome though has got to be the haze, an area flooded with fumes from a leaking weed killer canister, reducing visibility and requiring you to wear a gas mask during your visit. All the enemies here have a fungal mutation that makes them much more lethal, but later on you can plug the leak, stopping you from needing a gas mask at the cost of spreading mutation to other areas of the garden. These places all welcome you to explore them thoroughly, which on paper works great, having plenty of things to collect and places to build, but unfortunately this also leads to one of my biggest annoyances with Grounded. Many times Grounded will ask you to perform some sort of platforming athleticism, jumping from leaf to leaf high above the ground with little room for error. The hedge is a perfect example of this. Despite Grounded being many things, Super Mario Odyssey is definitely not one of them. I'll give it its due. The platforming's a nice change of pace and is used sparingly enough, but it really needs fleshing out more with at least a ledge grab manoeuvre or grappling hook to help correct a slightly miscalculated jump. It's downright painful falling from a climb and having to spend time in precious in-game daylight just to return to where you started. Luckily the game pretty much lets you save wherever you want with a generous 10 manual saves per garden, so you can easily just reload whenever you need to. Save scum away. That's true of the environment as a whole. The yard has a ton of verticality, and building even the most basic of structures to combat that can get tedious at times. Not to say I'd want them to change the design of the yard, it works great at naturally locking off late game areas. It's just nearly all the structures you can build require grass planks or weed stems, which are a goddamn pain to transport around the place. Weed stems in particular, since there are far fewer of them around the map. Sure, you can send them down zip lines or drag pallets around with you, but even they come with their own set of issues. I think it would have worked better if they took a page out of Minecraft's book and let the player build up using the most basic item that you can find and completely fill your inventory with it. You can kinda do this with mushroom bricks, but they are unlocked a fair way through the main game, and I'm not even sure they intended them to be used this way. I've got to admit though, when you do put the time in and build super high, getting those zip lines connected up and breezing across the skyline is damn satisfying to say the least. It just feels like an awful lot to ask of someone if their only goal is to finish the campaign. Of course, putting that aside, the environment is just downright fun to look around, partly due to its diversity and partly due to its inhabitants. I've talked briefly about how the bugs work in a combat encounter, but there's so much more to them than that. Much like their real life counterparts, they're such weird creatures, but now you're rubbing shoulders with them, you get to see them in a different light entirely. And I'm pleased to say there's a good deal of variation in the insects Obsidian shows. Antlions, fireflies, water fleas, aphids, I could go on, and they all have a ton of personality to them as well. Ladybirds are these hulking great tanks, mosquitoes duck and weave, imitating the same annoyance of their real-world counterparts, while spiders are these colossal monsters whose silhouettes give me anxiety-inducing flashbacks to Limbo. I love how attacking insects' eyes glow red when in combat. It's a neat little detail and looks terrifying at night. On a less threatening note, I think gnats have got to be my favourite just for the way they aimlessly float around, and the little noise they make when they bump into you always manages to put a smile on my face. I like that the bugs aren't randomly generated, instead opting for them to have a specific location to spawn in, with a few of them having set pathways that they'll move around now and again. It's nothing groundbreaking and you've likely seen it done many times before, but it works well here. If you've ever gone to collect resources from the oak tree, you'll likely get a bit uneasy knowing what lives around here, but not knowing if it's lurking around the next corner. As you progress through the later sections of the yard, you'll start to see colour swap versions of the same enemies. Maybe it's a bit of a cop-out, or maybe it's a clever way of letting the player keep their hard-earned muscle memory on parry timings. I'll let you be the judge of that one. Combining all of that though, you get something more than survival. You get pure, unadulterated horror. Picture this. You see some raw science in a narrow hole beneath you. After you hastily drop down to claim your reward, you quickly realise you can't get back out the way you came in, and now have to venture deeper into the hollow. The music changes from a soothing melody into something more foreboding as the screen washes with almost complete darkness. You light a torch, and panic quickly sets in as you see the walls coated in webs. You encounter a number of spiderlings. They don't pose much of a threat on their own, and it seems that Mummy isn't home right now. You might have just gotten lucky. You compose yourself and make for the exit, seeing sunlight drench the cave walls as the break of day arrives. You feel relief, but it's short-lived, as 8 legs of terror eclipse the light and a spider the size of a truck creeps towards you. There is no escape. Scenarios like this are commonplace in Grounded, and I can safely say that they get the blood pumping just as well as any true survival horror game. Seeing huge blades of grass bend and crunch as these massive bugs effortlessly push them aside shows how insignificant you are in this world, while being trapped in a dark underwater cave with a diminishing oxygen supply and no sense of direction just makes me sick to my stomach. It's disgusting in all the right ways. Moments like this are sprinkled all throughout Grounded. They're well realised and feel like the stitching that merges the environment and the insects together. You're not just grinding out resources, you're facing the unknown, overcoming your fears. You are surviving. I'd say that Grounded's secret weapon comes from Obsidian's knowledge on how to craft a satisfying and in-depth set of RPG mechanics. Sure, lots of games have RPG elements these days, and if I'm being perfectly honest, they have about as much depth as a paddling pool after James Corden has finished flopping around in it. In that regard, Grounded certainly isn't afraid to open up the Olympic-sized pool, so to speak. For starters, all the enemies in the game have weaknesses and resistances, with melee weapons like axes dealing chopping damage and swords dealing slashing damage. It makes you choose what weapon best suits the insect at hand. This little detail alone makes you choose how best to gear yourself out. You could carry around one of every weapon type at all times, making sure every eventuality is considered, and probably sounding like you're shifting a wardrobe as your backpack scrapes along the floor. Doing that though would limit how much loot you can bring back, cutting farming runs short. Maybe you could try bringing only weapons that deal extra damage to bigger enemies, finding a balance between the two playstyles, or maybe you could infuse your weapons with some elemental damages instead, giving you the option to deal 2 types of damage at once. That then poses even more questions. Do you create a sword with spicy damage, making wolf spiders a pushover at the cost of dealing better damage to the other late game bugs? How will you balance that with other weapons you take along? These aren't anything radical in terms of RPG mechanics, but they work in unison with everything else in the game that creates a deeply satisfying approach to combat, and in turn the items needed to upgrade them. The elemental upgrades are applied by the use of a smithing station and a varying quality of quartz that you'll find around the garden, usually placed at the end of a cave as a further incentive to step into the unknown. Weapons can be upgraded 9 times in total, allowing you to choose which damage type you want at level 6, with more crafting steps being added the higher you go to stop you supercharging too soon. Of course, you can completely forego the use of the 4 elemental types in exchange for keeping the weapons single typing, albeit with an even greater damage boost. Along with that, you'll even find special weapons throughout your playthrough that come stacked with a predetermined elemental type. The idea behind this is you get the best of both worlds as a dual typing and an increased damage boost since you can't change it as you level up. The upgrading system works much the same way with armour as well. 9 levels, split pathways depending on your playstyle, tank more damage or gain an extra perk, the choice is yours. Yeah, I forgot to mention armour pieces have their own abilities unique to them, with an extra bonus given if all 3 pieces are from the same set. I'll be brutally honest here, I like all the potential for character building that these perks offer, but they never feel realised enough that I'd ever use them over the defensive buff of the heavier armour sets. They either feel too situational, or at best will boost a subpar weapon to mediocre standards. Either way, you'll want to sponge more damage when swamped by groups of enemies, making perfect parrying more difficult. This is also indicative of a bigger problem Grounded faces. The game is bloody awful at explaining what perks do, when they've been activated and how likely to occur or powerful they are. They go far enough to give you a menu page description on some symbols, but not others. They don't even mention generic is classed as a weapon type at all, and that's a problem given that it's secretly one of the best typings in the game. Take this as an example. Here's a mutation that lets you deal increased critical hit damage, but the game never actually tells you by how much. It's kind of an important detail on deciding whether I should build with this in mind or not, and this type of thing happens all the damn time. Worst of all, they give out this information regularly if they've made any changes to a perk in an update. I know this seems like pretty petty stuff, but I really love when games give you the information themselves without the need to Google search everything. It breaks the immersion and limits my creativity to experiment with builds. If I've got to Google what this thing does, I might as well find out if it's even worth leveling up in the first place, and from there I'll soon find out the best weapons and armour in the game and how to get them, killing all wonder moving forward. Along with armour perks, the game also has mutations, a form of perk you unlock just from general gameplay, usually from doing repetitive tasks such as weapon kills or chopping down grass. That's not an insult to its design, however. They're well paced and you'll unlock most of them from experimentation throughout the course of the game. Unlike armour perks, these things really do feel fleshed out, giving you access to a maximum of 3 active at once when starting out, with the option to upgrade to 5 later on. I like how these are handled. Keeping them a mystery until you meet the requirements feels rewarding, and, I'm pleased to say, these mutations really do synergise well with each other. You could combine critical hit chance, increase critical hit damage and health boost for a combat encounter, or increase movement speed and stamina boost for traversal. And the best part is, the game lets you freely swap out your active mutations at any time without any penalty. It's like being every character build at once without becoming too overpowered, and is yet another way the game charts your progression without the need for a traditional levelling system. Speaking of levelling up though, Grounded does still use perk points as a way of boosting individual stats. These come in the form of Milk Molars and Mega Milk Molars, with the former boosting your personal stats, and the latter being applied to everyone joining you on your journey. Molars, like all the other good stuff in Grounded, are used as rewards for exploration, clearing caves and the like. Thankfully these are only vitamin tablets shaped like teeth, otherwise I'd have concerns on why Dr. Tully has children's pearly whites buried underneath his patio. Personal stats cover the basics like hunger and thirst drain, health and stamina boost, but you'll definitely want to level up the aforementioned mutation slots. Seriously, these things just work so well together. Along with that, the group stats all cover the stack size of items in your backpack, consumables, arrows and resources respectively, which are all useful, but the resource increase is by far the best of the 3. In my recent outings with Grounded, I've played it almost solely as a single player game, but bring up to 3 friends with you and it can start to feel like a summer camp, just with higher stakes if you can't figure out how to sharpen a stick. It works pretty damn well as a multiplayer game. Everyone can freely explore and build bases independently from one another. Great if you can't stand having roommates. It's a shame there's no split screen multiplayer, but that's understandable given the vast amount of things you can build. Grounded does have a world sharing option though, letting players of your choosing play and edit a copy of your garden even when you're offline. It's a super cool feature for a game that's pretty resource heavy. Just log in, do some grinding, and hope everyone else will in their own time. The game's also pretty good at scaling enemy health to match the number of people playing. There's no free rides with this one. Well, that's not entirely true. They do give you a custom difficulty mode as well, letting you make yourself invincible, never need food or water, even making it so the game pauses when you go into your inventory. But let me tell you, that last one is perfect if you have the habit of throwing yourself off cliff edges without checking you've got a dandelion equipped. It happens a lot more than I'm proud to admit. I love how they handle the custom difficulty, never forcing you to have every modifier active at once, meaning you can really tailor the experience that bit more without being so godlike with powers that the game loses all its impact. That being said, if you did want godlike powers, or at least not having to keep looking over your shoulder all the time, Grounded also has a creative mode letting you build anything you want without using resources. All of the bugs still populate the yard but will never become hostile to you. However, if the mere sight of a wolf spider turns your stomach, no matter how friendly he may seem, you can also play with the bugs removed, just to be on the safe side. And all this customization doesn't just stop there. The menu is full of options for FOV, keyboard and controller mapping. It's not the most interesting of things to cover, but it's all nice when it's there. The best one of these though has got to be all of the accessibility options available. I love when devs take the time to add this stuff. They're things that 95% of the player base won't need to use, and it takes a portion of the development cycle, but they did it regardless so more people can enjoy it. They even have a setting to turn all the spiders into pink floating blobs to help with arachnophobia. Personally, the blobs creep me out still, but maybe that's because I know what's really stood in front of me. Oh, and lastly, I have to give them major credit for letting us keep all our early access save data. Literally hundreds of hours of playtime have been saved thanks to this decision. It's nice to know they considered all the people whose feedback helped shape the game leading up to its release. So with that rather lengthy dive into Grounded, is it actually any good? Yeah, of course it is. It managed to convert a survivalist non-believer such as myself after all, even if it only ends up becoming a one-time thing. If it wasn't already obvious, I'm a huge fan of how Grounded works its RPG mechanics into its gameplay. Where so many others stick to the tried and true method of using XP to gain strength, Grounded tries to work its mechanics around its survival genre, giving players tangible meaning to the items they find by offering them choices on how best they could be used. With the game world foregoing a procedurally generated environment means that every area can be tailored to making it feel like you're always on the verge of discovery. Despite my grievances with the armor perk system and some of the platforming elements, neither of these things impact the game enough to deter from its overall quality. The gorgeous world drenched in colour, the horrifying experiences with its residents, this game made me feel so much more than I ever expected to when I first booted it up. Grounded is a damn fine game, and its full release feels almost bittersweet. I'm happy it's finally here in its entirety, but I'll definitely miss watching it change and evolve so drastically with each new update. I hope people can enjoy it as much as I have over these past 2 years. With that said, I want to thank you for watching, if indeed you still are. Thank you. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the channel with a like and a sub, it really does make a difference. But now I want to know what your thoughts are about Grounded. Are you a survival expert, or did this game tempt you in like it did for me? Let me know in the comments below. With that being said, I'm off. Ta-ra!